Tentative description of a dinner given to promote the impeachment of President Eisenhower. After it became obvious that the strange rain would never stop, and after it became obvious that the President was doing everything in his power, and after it became obvious that the President's General Staff was still in contact with the President deep in the heart of Georgia, while deep in the heart of South America, the President's left-hand man was proving all the world loves an American. And after it became obvious that the strange rain would never stop, and that old soldiers never drown, and that roses in the rain had forgotten the word for bloom, and that perverted pollen blown on sunless seas was eaten by irradiated fish who spawned up cloud-leaf streams and fell onto our dinner plates. And after it became obvious that the President was doing everything in his power to make the world safe for nationalism, his brilliant military mind never having realized that nationalism itself was the idiotic superstition which would blow up the world. And after it became obvious that the President nevertheless still carried, no matter where he went in the strange rain, the little telegraph key which, like a can opener, could be used instantly to open but not to close the hot box of final war, if not to waylay any stray asinine action by any stray asinine second lieutenant pressing any strange button anywhere far away over an Arctic ocean, thus illuminating the world once and for all. God bless America. And after it became obvious that the law of gravity was still in effect, and that what blows up must come down on everyone, including white citizens. And after it became obvious that the voice of America was still the deaf ear of America, and that the President was unable to hear the underprivileged natives of the world shouting, "No contamination without representation," in the strange rain from which there was no escape except peace. And after it became obvious that the word truth had only a comic significance to the Atomic Energy Commission, while the President danced madly to Mad Admiral Strauss waltzes, wearing special atomic earplugs which prevented him from hearing Albert Schweitzer and 9,235 other scientists telling him about spastic generations and blind, boneless babies in the rain from which there was no escape except peace. And after it became obvious that the President was doing everything in his power to get through the next 4 years without eating any of the crates of irradiated vegetables well-wishers had sent him from all over, and which were filling the corridors and antechambers and bedchambers and chamber pots in the not-so-White House, not to mention all the other various golf houses scattered throughout the land of prosperity. And after it became obvious that the great soldier had become the great conciliator, who had become the great compromiser, who had become the great fence-sitter, who actually had heard of the Supreme Court's decision to desegregate the land of the free, and had not only heard of it, but had actually read it. And after it became obvious that the President had gone to Gettysburg 77 years ago, and had given his Gettysburg address to the postman, and so dedicated himself to the unfinished task. Then it was that the natives of the Republic began assembling in the driving rain from which there was no escape except peace. And then it was that no invitations had to be sent out for the great testimonial dinner, except to politicians whose respected names would lend weight to the project, but who did not come anyway, suspecting the whole thing was a plot to save the world from the clean bomb from which there was no escape except peace. And women who still needed despair to look truly tragic came looking very beautiful and very tragic indeed, since there was despair to spare. And some men also despaired and sat down in Bohemia and were too busy to come. But other men came whose only political action during the past 20 years had been to flush a protesting toilet and run. And babies came in their carriages carrying irradiated dolls and holding onto crazy strings of illuminated weather balloons filled with Nagasaki air. And those who had not left their TV sets long enough to notice the weather in 7 years now came swimming through the rain, holding their testimonials. And those came who had never marched in sports car protest parades, and those came who had never been arrested for sailing a protesting golden rule in unpacific oceans. And Noah came in his own ark, looking surprisingly like an outraged Jesus Christ, and cruised about, flying his pinion and picking up 2 of each beast that wanted to be preserved in the rain, which was raining real cats and dogs, and from which there was no escape except peace. And peddlers came in lead jockstraps, selling hot dogs and rubber American flags, and waving petitions proclaiming it un-American to play golf on the same holy days that clean bombs were set off on time. And finally, after everyone who was anyone, and after everyone who was no one had arrived, and after every soul was seated and waiting for the symbolic mushroom soup to be served, the president himself came in, took one look around, and said, "We resign." This poem starts off with the Spanish painter Francisco Goya, but takes off into America. In Goya's greatest scenes, we seem to see the people of the world exactly at the moment when they first attain the title of suffering humanity. They writhe upon the page in a veritable rage of adversity, heaped up, groaning with babies and bayonets under cement skies in an abstract landscape of blasted trees, bent statues, bats' wings and beaks, slippery gibbets, cadavers and carnivorous cocks, and all the final hollering monsters of the imagination of disaster. They are so bloody real, it is as if they really still existed. And they do, only the landscape is changed. They still are ranged along the roads, plagued by legionnaires, false windmills, and demented roosters. They are the same people, only further from home, on freeways 50 lanes wide, on a concrete continent spaced with bland billboards illustrating imbecile illusions of happiness. The scene shows fewer tumbrils, but more maimed citizens in painted cars, and they have strange license plates and engines that devour America. The world is a beautiful place, The world is a beautiful place to be born into, if you don't mind happiness not always being so very much fun. If you don't mind a touch of hell now and then, just when everything is fine, because even in heaven they don't sing all the time. The world is a beautiful place to be born into, if you don't mind some people dying all the time, or maybe only starving some of the time, which isn't half so bad if it isn't you. Oh, the world is a beautiful place to be born into, if you don't much mind a few dead minds in the higher places, or a bomb or two now and then in your upturned faces, or such other improprieties as our name-brand society is prey to, with its men of distinction and its men of extinction and its priests and other patrolmen and its various segregations and congressional investigations and other constipations that our fool flesh is heir to. Yes, the world is the best place of all for a lot of such things as making the fun scene and making the love scene and making the sad scene and singing low songs and having inspirations and walking around looking at everything and smelling flowers and goosing statues and even thinking and kissing people and making babies and wearing pants and waving hats and dancing and going swimming in rivers on picnics in the middle of the summer and just generally living it up. Yes, but then right in the middle of it comes the smiling mortician. William Butler Yeats on the 3rd Avenue L. Reading Yeats, I do not think of Ireland, but of midsummer New York, and of myself back then, reading that copy I found on the 3rd Avenue L, the L with its fly-hung fans and its signs reading, "Spitting is forbidden." The L careening through its third-story world with its third-story people in their third-story doors, looking as if they had never heard of the ground. An old dame watering her plant, or a joker in a straw putting a stick pin in his peppermint tie, and looking just like he had nowhere to go but Coney Island, or an undershirted guy rocking in his rocker, watching the L pass by, as if he expected it to be different each time. Reading Yeats, I do not think of Arcady and of its woods which Yeats thought dead. I think instead of all the gone faces getting off at midtown places with their hats and their jobs, and of that lost book I had with its blue cover and its white inside, where a pencil hand had written, "Horsemen pass by." Pennycandystore poem. The Pennycandystore beyond the L is where I first fell in love with unreality. Jelly beans glowed in the semi-gloom of that September afternoon. A cat upon the counter moved among the licorice sticks and Tootsie Rolls and oh boy gum. Outside the leaves were falling as they died. A wind had blown away the sun. A girl ran in. Her hair was rainy. Her breasts were breathless in the little room. Outside the leaves were falling, and they cried, "Too soon, too soon." The following was dedicated to a certain great directrice of a San Francisco museum. Truth is not the secret of a few, yet you would maybe think so, the way some librarians and cultural ambassadors, and especially museum directors, act. You'd think they had a corner on it, the way they walk around, shaking their high heads and looking as if they never went to the bathroom or anything. But I wouldn't blame them if I were you. They say the spiritual is best conceived in abstract terms. And then, too, walking around in museums always makes me want to sit down. I always feel so constipated in those high altitudes. Poem about love. Just as I used to say, love comes harder to the aged because they've been running on the same old rails too long. And then when the sly switch comes along, they miss the turn and burn up the wrong rail while the gay caboose goes flying and the steam engine driver don't recognize them new electric horns, and the aged run out on the rusty spur which ends up in the dead grass where the rusty tin cans and bed springs and old razor blades and moldy mattresses lie, and the rail breaks off dead right there, though the ties go on a while, and the aged say to themselves, well, this must be the place we were supposed to lie down. And they do, while the bright saloon careens along a way on a high hilltop, its windows full of blue sky and lovers with flowers, their long hair streaming, and all of them laughing and waving and whispering to each other and looking out and wondering what that graveyard where the rails end is. This is a poem about a dog I see walking around North Beach all the time. The dog trots freely in the street and sees reality, and the things he sees are bigger than himself, and the things he sees are his reality, drunks in doorways, moons on trees. The dog trots freely through the street, and the things he sees are smaller than himself, fish on newsprint, ants in holes, chickens in Chinatown windows, their heads a block away. The dog trots freely in the street, and the things he smells smell something like himself. The dog trots freely in the street, past puddles and babies, cats and cigars, pool rooms and policemen. He doesn't hate cops. He merely has no use for them, and he goes past them and past the dead cows hung up whole in front of the San Francisco meat market. He would rather eat a tender cow than a tough policeman, though either might do. And he goes past the Romeo Ravioli factory, and past Coit's Tower, and past Congressman Doyle of the Un-American Activities Committee. He's afraid of Coit's Tower, but he's not afraid of Congressman Doyle, although what he hears is very discouraging, very depressing, very absurd to a sad young dog like himself, to a serious dog like himself. But he has his own free world to live in, his own fleas to eat. He will not be muzzled. Congressman Doyle is just another fire hydrant to him. The dog trots freely in the street and has his own dog's life to live and to think about and to reflect upon, touching and tasting and testing everything investigating everything without benefit of perjury, a real realist with a real tale to tell, and a real tale to tell it with, a real live barking democratic dog engaged in real free enterprise with something to say about ontology, something to say about reality and how to see it and how to hear it, with his head cocked sideways at street corners as if he is always just about to have his picture taken for Victor Records, listening for his master's voice and looking like a living question mark into the great gramophone of puzzling existence, with its wondrous hollow horn which always seems just about to spout forth some victorious answer to everything. The following is a description of a museum everybody's always walking through. Museum of objects depicting the history of my race. One word and one void and one sperm cell in a voiceless pool after the beginning of eternity. One stone forest in the midst of which is chaos. One potential amphibian flopping out of a sea. One pollywog willing to lose its tail, and thus establishing the existence of free will. One ape unaware of his essence. One undecided embryo just beginning to represent ontogeny recapitulating phylogeny. One small wooden man looking vaguely like a statue of humanity and vaguely like a statue of inhumanity. One small wooden wheel about to turn and turn. One brushwood gate with a snail for a lock. One Greek island adrift in the Aegean. One grave Tyrian trader shaking out more sail. One petrified lizard on the steps of Alexandria, and one dog about to bite a flea cast in lava on the slopes of Mount Olympus. Two transfixed lovers coupled in coitus forever in Pompeian space and time, their hungry voices hung forever in the air. One small gesture of despair. One penis on fire like a turning sword, held in the hand of an Excalibur arm risen out of a lake, and one holy grail looking like a womb, and two kinds of unicorn looking for a virgin. One composite stereopticon illustrating the fetal development of Columbus. One sudden whirl of flamenco dancers, castanets caught in Spanish air, white teeth flashing over shaken breasts. 6 knitting women in fishermen's doorways, sitting silent behind a photochrome of my Puerto Rican grandfather. One great gray-green greasy Limpopo river in jungle twilight, full of floating trees and inscrutable natives chewing pod and unaware they had missed Christ. One silent, statuesque woman posing as Miss Liberty with flaming torch over a harbor on a canceled postage stamp received in Puerto Rico. 9 half-smoked Havana cigars on the Ellis Island ferry. Several imaginary citizens and my Puerto Rican grandfather. One field of poppies blowing row on row, not so far from Flanders. 6 self-made nuns and one lost French girl looking for her way. One flower found in Picardy and pressed in a book in Brooklyn. One lifeboat full of nuns from the SS Deutschland, and one ticket to Niagara Falls. 32 lessons in citizenship revised yearly. One wandering Sephardic Jew from Puerto Rico wandered up to Newport on the Fall River line with an unscheduled side trip to Niagara Falls. 13 famous speeches pasted up above a shaving mirror, one tinted tintype of my French grandmother in a picture hat having her picture taken by a dark stranger, one picture book illustrating the sexual motivations of the amateur photographer, one copy of Bruegel's Marriage with penises painted out, 33 color slides of Lake Louise and the Thousand Islands and Chautauqua and my French grandmother, one screen door summer in Brooklyn, 100 birds for sale at a debate on the subject, should anarchists keep canaries? One lost sound of freedom in a cracked bell, which nevertheless still rings and rings. One skyscraper construction worker 30 stories up, transfixed, falling in air. One Christ in concrete, one small gesture of despair. And my Puerto Rican grandfather. One heart crane on the stern of a ship about to jump, one Brooklyn Bridge spanning America, 13 freeways intersecting 60 cities in search of community, 303 city buses in a car barn at midnight, one streetcar named Despair on a grass-grown track out behind the waterworks, 14,000 subway riders sitting motionless, face to face, hands on knees, newspapers folded, hurtling through light bulb tunnels in the dark night of 5 p.m. One turning wheel turned into a wagon wheel, turned into a machine wheel, turned into a wheel within a wheel, turning a Ferris wheel set with Roman candles and turning sparklers over a scenic railway run by a junkie under the delusion he is captain of an interborough subway. 7 billion white-collar workers whispering lost in the want ads like a voice from under a rug. 13 cracks in 12 picture windows reflecting one hip vision of eternity and one hip vision of America flashed upon a train window at a country crossroads at midnight. One bohemian beard in which nests the black painted sun of tomorrow, 8 illegible signatures on a Bill of Rights, and one World's Fair exhibit of underprivileged peoples with names omitted, one representational painting of one representative of the people in the act of misrepresenting the people, 83 police officers patrolling poetry readings, and 8 concentration camps filled with useless eaters, one too hot summer in Brooklyn, one still very beautiful woman come back to walk the hills of Picardy, remembering her girlhood, her blouse full of apples, when the sweet birds sang, and my Puerto Rican grandfather. One dark pike raising its head in a moon-dark lake and surveying civilization, one final Sunday after the war. One poet in a landscape running, various utensils used by the natives of New York during the final age of nationalism. One bottle of blue moonlight reflected from the Palomar Observatory turned into a woman's toilet sometime during the subsequent pastoral era. One state portrait of the last smiling president of the last recognizable nation wearing a plug hat with a violet sunburst on its side, 2 last lovers lost on an abandoned movie screen, their echoed voices still upon the air, one poet in a landscape running, one small voice of dissent, one small gesture of despair, one world seen as a museum, and my Puerto Rican grandfather. The poet's eye. The poet's eye, obscenely seeing, sees the surface of the round world with its drunk rooftops and wooden oiseaux on clotheslines, and its clay males and females with hot legs and rosebud breasts in roll-away beds, and its trees full of mysteries, and its Sunday parks and speechless statues, and its America with its ghost towns and empty Ellis Islands, and its surrealist landscape of mindless prairies, supermarket suburbs, steam-heated cemeteries, cinerama holy days, and protesting cathedrals. A kiss-proof world of plastic toilet seats, Tampax and taxis, drugged store cowboys and Las Vegas virgins, disowned Indians and cinemad matrons, un-Roman senators and conscientious non-objectors, and all the other fatal, shorn-up fragments of the immigrant's dream come too true and mislaid among the sunbathers. Crucifixion poem. Sometime during eternity, some guys show up, and one of them who shows up real late is a kind of carpenter from some square-type place like Galilee, and he starts wailing and claiming he is hep to who made heaven and earth, and that the cat who really laid it on us is his dad. And moreover, he adds, it's all writ down on some scroll-type parchments which some henchmen leave lying around the Dead Sea somewheres a long time ago, and which you won't even find for a couple of 1,000 years or so, or at least for 1,947 of them, to be exact, and even then nobody really believes them, or me, for that matter. You're hot, they tell him, and they cool him. They stretch him on the tree to cool, and everybody after that is always making models of this tree with him hung up, and always crooning his name and calling him to come down and sit in on their combo, as if he is the king cat who's got to blow. Only he don't come down from his tree. Him just hang there on his tree, looking real petered out and real cool, and also, according to a roundup of late world news from the usual unreliable sources, real dead. Chagall poem. Don't let that horse eat that violin, cried Chagall's mother, but he kept right on painting and became famous and kept on painting the horse with violin in mouth. And when he finally finished it, he jumped up upon the horse and rode away, waving the violin, and then with a low bow gave it to the first naked nude he ran across, and there were no strings attached. This poem starts out with a Spanish Impressionist painter, Sarolla, and ends up in America. Sarolla's women, in their picture hats, stretched upon his canvas beaches, beguiled the Spanish Impressionists. And were they fraudulent pictures of the world, the way the light played on them, creating illusions of love? I cannot help but think that their reality was almost as real as my memory of today, when the last sun hung on the hills and I heard the day falling like the gulls that fell almost to land, while the last picnickers lay and loved in the blowing yellow broom, resisted and resisting, tearing themselves apart again, again, until the last hot-hung climax, which could at last no longer be resisted, made them moan, and night's trees stood up. Kafka poem. Kafka's castle stands above the world like a last Bastille of the mystery of existence. Its blind approaches baffle us. Steep paths plunge nowhere from it. Roads radiate into air like the labyrinth wires of a telephone central through which all calls are infinitely untraceable. Up there it is heavenly weather. Souls dance undressed together, and like loiterers on the fringes of a fair, we ogle the unobtainable, imagined mystery. Yet away around on the far side, like the stage door of a circus tent, is a wide, wide vent in the battlements where even elephants waltz through. Poem about poetry written in Old English. See, it was like this when we waltz into this place. A couple of papish cats is doing an Aztec two-step, and I says, Dad, let's cut. But then this dame comes up behind me, see, and says, you and me could really exist. Wow, I says. Only the next day, she has bad teeth and really hates poetry. The Poet as an Acrobat. Constantly risking absurdity and death whenever he performs above the heads of his audience, the poet, like an acrobat, climbs on rhyme to a high wire of his own making, and balancing on I-beams above a sea of faces, paces his way to the other side of day, performing entrechats and sleight-of-foot tricks and other high theatrics, and all without mistaking anything for what it may not be. For he's the super-realist who must perforce perceive taught truth before the taking of each stance or step in his supposed advance toward that still higher perch where beauty stands and waits with gravity to start her death-defying leap. And he, a little Charlie Chaplin man, who may or may not catch her fair, eternal form spread-eagled in the empty air of existence.